morning. It is 10:04. I just finished my Hawk Academy class, which is the first class that I have on Tuesdays and Thursdays. That is the small group class where I'm just providing additional support to a much smaller group of students. And so in that class, I was just having them work on continuing their outline for this essay that they're going to be writing starting tomorrow, more than likely, for a response to the speech Blood, Toil, Tears, and Sweat by Winston Churchill. And so right now I'm in between classes. At 10:20, I'm going to start my class, my homeroom class. And this is going to be the first class that I do this activity with to address the events of yesterday. So yesterday, the state capitol was under attack, for lack of a better term, by Trump supporters, people that feel like the election is not valid, people that are unhappy that Biden won, agitators, white nationalists, just all of that rolled into one. Attacked the Capitol building yesterday. And so obviously, as a teacher of 8th graders, a teacher of social studies and US history, it's definitely something that I feel like has to be addressed and talked about in the classroom. But I also know that it's something that has to be talked about and addressed in a very careful and purposeful and planned out way. So I spent, after I spoke to you guys yesterday, I spent a good portion of time just kind of mentally thinking about, okay, what am I going to do tomorrow? How do I want to handle this? Because I knew I was going to do something, I just didn't know what. So it took me a little while, but I came up with what I chose to do, and I shared it on Insta stories, excuse me, for teachers that were thinking the same thing and kind of had to get it together overnight. So I'm going to share that process with you today. I don't know how it's going to go because I haven't done it yet. I feel confident, and I think it's going to go okay because it's structured. And before I show you what I'm going to do specifically for this, just generally speaking, because I've had this question over the years from teachers, just that have been aware of some of the topics of conversations that I have brought up in class over the years with different age groups, because I've taught 5th grade, I've taught 3rd grade. And so the fear I've heard from teachers that want to do stuff like this and want to be more inclusive and want to talk about social justice topics in the classroom, they're always frightened of what parents are going to say, or parents are going to think, or what admin is going to say, what admin is going to think, what the district is going to say, are they allowed to do it, so on and so forth. And the key to having these conversations is just to remember that, as long as you're handling it correctly, you're not doing anything wrong. And so when I do these kinds of conversations, I just ground them in the idea that my goal is not to take my opinion and force it upon my students. If that is your goal, and if that's what you think you're supposed to do, then yes, you're gonna have some backlash. Like, a parent is gonna be upset, admin is not gonna like it, the district is not gonna like it. But if your goal is just to really make sure you are giving accurate information, true information, and opening it up an area for students to kind of wade through that information, talk about it, express their thoughts, their feelings, their reactions, and completely remove yourself and your opinion from it, then you shouldn't have that fear. And so I don't have that fear because I know that that's what I'm going to do. Yes, I have very strong feelings and opinions about what happened yesterday, but at the end of the day, those are my feelings, my opinions, and I'm convicted on them. But I have to accept and acknowledge, like I've told my students before, not everybody is going to view things the way that I do. Not everybody saw what happened yesterday and was outraged by it, because there were people participating in it. There are people this morning that are going to justify that what happened yesterday, yeah, it's sad, but those people were patriots and they were doing the right thing. We already know this. We already know that there's people out there that believe that. So I have to make sure that I'm just giving them the information and letting them think through it and letting them come to their own conclusions. And I have never had a parent over the years come back and be upset with me about things like that. And if they have, they haven't been upset enough to express it to me directly, because I think they realize I'm opening up an opportunity for conversation to take place that should take place. So just kind of remember that you're not there to fix it. You're not there to solve it. You're not there to have all the answers. Yesterday, while I was talking to my group of students after class and they knew what was going on, one of my students said something like, you know, I thought the buildings, like the Capitol building, was supposed to be this really secure building. If that's the case, how are they able to get in there? And I literally had to say, that's a good question, and I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. And that was the truth. So just remember that you're not there to give answers. You're not there to have a solution. You're not there to give them your opinion and tell them they should believe it. You're there to just give them information and hope that they critically think about it and come to a conclusion that you feel is appropriate. But I mean, if they don't, there's nothing you can do about it. So what I'm going to be doing today is we're going to be using a strategy that I learned when I took that trip to Finland called the Fishbowl strategy to discuss the concept of protesting and good trouble. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to play this video that I found on YouTube. It's by Amnesty International. It's titled Why Protest is Important. It's about 2 minutes long, and it just talks about the good that can come from protesting and what its purpose is. And then we're going to transition to specifically looking at John Lewis and his concept of good trouble. And we're going to do that by looking at the trailer for the, I think documentary would be the best thing to call this, the John Lewis Good Trouble documentary by CNN Films. And he, in this trailer, does define what good trouble means to him. And then there's very brief pieces of information about what kind of activism he participated in his younger days, and, you know, just really giving a visual to what good trouble is and looks like. So we're going to watch those two things, and we're going to talk about and make sure we all understand what protests are meant to do and what good trouble really is before we launch into the actual Fishbowl discussion itself. So they're going to have this Jamboard that just kind of explains the process for Fishbowl discussions. So it says, or the question we're going to be discussing is, were the group of people that gathered outside of the Capitol building getting into good trouble yesterday, or was it something else? And then we're going to walk through the steps and the rules and procedures for the Fishbowl discussion. And basically the way that it works is when you're in class, under normal circumstances, there are 6 chairs arranged in a circle in the middle of the classroom. And 5 students can sit in those 6 chairs. So one of the chairs always has to be open so that there is always an opportunity for someone to join the conversation. And if someone comes in and fills that 6th chair, one of the 5 students that was already present and sitting has to just get up and kind of leave to open up the opportunity for someone else to share. The rest of the class is just around that inner circle, either standing or sitting. When I did this last year, they were standing, and they know they are not talking. So the only people that can talk are the 5 people in those chairs in the middle. And they know that if someone's talking, you're listening. We're not talking over each other. We're listening as someone is speaking and then waiting our turn to share our thoughts and opinions. And the goal is not to come to some final conclusion. It's really just to have an exchange of ideas, to listen to different perspectives, to understand and learn how to listen respectfully. And I, as the teacher, don't speak. I only facilitate. So the only time I'm going to speak is if I need to clarify what a question is, or, you know, make sure that there's a proper or the correct amount of people in the chairs, like just really just a facilitator, nothing else. And so that's how I ensure that nowhere in there is my opinion guiding the conversation or directing the conversation in any way. So that is what we're going to do in class today. I said in my Insta story last night that I did this once last year with a different topic, but similar in the sense that it could have, you know, been a very heated, uncomfortable situation, but it went really well. And it was my students' like favorite thing. Like, I couldn't even end the discussion because we ran out of time. And then when we ran out of time, my students wanted to just continue and like do it again. So that's what we're gonna do. And then I gave directions on Google Classroom, and I was very careful and very general about how I described things and what we're gonna do in general, sorry. So I'm just gonna read to you what I wrote. It said, yesterday, Congress met to certify the Electoral College votes or certify Joe Biden's win of the presidential election. During that time, a large group of people made their way into the Capitol building to stop the process from happening, and violence ensued, resulting, and now we know it was actually 4 people, 4 deaths, and I'm gonna add injuries when I put the camera down. So it'll say 4 deaths and other injuries. This group of people have been generally described as Trump supporters who have voiced the belief that the election was rigged and that Joe Biden did not truly win the election. Today, we are going to revisit the concept of civic engagement through protest. We will watch a quick video that discusses why protests are important, and we will learn about a man named John Lewis and the concept of good trouble. Then we will participate in a fishbowl discussion and decide if yesterday's events qualify as good trouble or if they should be classified as something else. We will also think about how the country should respond. So notice that, let me change the schedule time because it's actually 10:15. I was very careful in how I worded things because I didn't want it to ever feel at any point like Miss Robinson is telling me what to think. So I think I did a good job of just like stating the facts of what happened and just kind of leaving it open to them. So it's 10:15 right now. I'm gonna put the camera down, make sure I'm all set and ready to go. And then I will be sure to let you know how it went after class, or probably later today. So wish me luck. I'll let you know how it goes. Just to start, I'm going to be very honest with you guys. Today we're going to have a conversation that we're going to have to really work towards making sure that we are respectful, listening to each other, making sure that we remember the idea that I know I've spoken to you guys about before, that in this world there are going to be people that you agree with and there are going to be people that you disagree with, and we don't have to agree with everything everybody says. But we do have to accept and acknowledge that there are people in the world that have varying viewpoints, varying thoughts and opinions. We have to accept it and we have to acknowledge it, okay? And by accepting it and acknowledging it, it doesn't mean that you're justifying it. It doesn't mean that you're agreeing with it. It just means that you're acknowledging that it exists. So I'm gonna be very honest with you before we go over the agenda that for me, yesterday was a very challenging day. If you don't know what happened yesterday, yesterday was the day that the electoral votes were supposed to be certified, finalized. It's kind of like just this formality. And in the middle of that happening, there was a large group of people that were able to get into the Capitol building and just really cause a lot of chaos. Like, it became very violent. People were hurt, obviously. At this point, the last I heard, 4 people died in the process, and it was a very large, like, again, it was a very historical moment. So you guys have witnessed multiple historical things just in the past year. So what happened yesterday has not happened in like 200 years. So it was a very major thing that a group of citizens were able to just get inside the Capitol building. So not only was it historical, but it was scary for a lot of people. It was shocking for a lot of people. It was shocking for me. So we're gonna talk about that today, but we're gonna talk about it in a very structured way, because conversations like this, if they are not structured and if they are not set up to make sure there's mutual respect, can become very like just chaotic, and that's not what we want to have happen. Ella, do you have a question or a comment?
The thing that happened at the Capitol, it kind of reminded me of Shay's Rebellion.
Yeah, so like we're gonna be talking about some things today, and that you guys may be able to tie some of what you saw yesterday to some of the things that we have talked about. And so we're gonna go through it. I'm gonna let you know how it's gonna occur. Not if you want to participate in the conversation, you will be able to do that. But at the same time, if you do not want to participate in the conversation, that's perfectly fine. So it's not something that you're gonna be forced to do. And what we're gonna do is gonna be called a fishbowl discussion. And we're gonna be talking about protest and something that is, or the concept of good trouble in relationship to protest. And before we do that, we're gonna watch a couple of videos to make sure we have some background built, to make sure we understand protest and why people do it, and then what is good trouble, because that is a phrase or a term that was coined by someone named John Lewis. Do you guys see my screen? That was a phrase that was coined by someone named John Lewis. So we're gonna talk about what exactly that is. And then we're gonna get into the discussion portion of it, okay? Any questions for me before we get started? Yes, no? Okay, so the first thing that we're gonna look at, let's look at this video that talks about protests. Now, we are familiar with the concept of protests because we've been working on this activist project, and we talked about some things that people can do in protests early in the school year, but it's been a while since we have talked specifically about what it means to protest and what the purpose is. So we're gonna watch this quick video, make sure we have an understanding of that, and then we'll move on.
Historically, protests have led to improved protection of human rights.
So I just finished with my homeroom class about 20 minutes ago. It's 11:41. The discussion took the entire class period. My homeroom class is typically the more reserved, I guess would be the right word, class. Like, they are pretty quiet, aren't as quick to speak, offer opinions as my switch class. But even this homeroom class did participate. Now, I will be honest and say it was the same, I would say maybe 5 to 7 students that spoke. But the thing to remember with this activity is you have to respect a student's choice to not participate. So especially with something like this, I don't know the reasons for them not participating. Maybe they didn't know about it. Maybe they have no thoughts about it. Maybe they're too traumatized to talk about it. Maybe they have an opinion that they aren't necessarily comfortable with expressing. So you're never really pressuring someone to participate. You're never really saying, so-and-so, you haven't said anything. So that was fine. If they didn't participate, I at least know that they heard some varying viewpoints, thoughts, and opinions. Obviously, in the virtual setting, I don't know if some of them weren't participating because they were doing something else, and that is totally possible, but that's something I have to let go of. That's something I don't have any control over. But the conversation was good. It was respectful. And so for me, the way that these fishbowls go, I have the one question that starts everything, and then as they're responding, I'm mentally thinking of other questions along the way and bringing those in to kind of keep the conversation going. So most of the students that chose to speak all talked about the fact that they felt it was bad trouble and gave their reasons why. Some of the questions that I asked based on their responses were the following. One girl in my homeroom class said that this reminded her of Shay's Rebellion, which of course is going to make your heart as a history teacher happy, because she's taking something that we've learned about and now applying it and seeing the similarities and maybe some of the differences between something historical and something that happened today. So we talked about that, and I said, okay, let's talk about that. Is this really any different than something like Shay's Rebellion? Some people view Shay's Rebellion as a very patriotic moment where this group of farmers banded together to fight for their rights. So we talked about that. Someone else mentioned their opinion on how it was handled in terms of the police, and she brought in the term white privilege. We didn't initially talk about that right off the bat because that was just a part of her response, but as we were wrapping it up, I brought it back to that and I asked, is it a fair comparison to compare yesterday to the Black Lives Matter movement and talk about the concept of white privilege? Does that belong in this conversation? And so I asked that student to kind of talk about why she why that was something that struck her, and she explained it. And I would probably say my favorite part of this exchange is that in response to her explaining that and her opinions on it, one of my white students acknowledged it, but then also admitted that hearing that phrase made him uncomfortable, like as a white person. And so I asked him if he didn't mind to kind of explain or share why it made him uncomfortable. What about that made him uncomfortable? And he did. And you could tell he was totally nervous about like being vulnerable like that, but he did it anyway. And then in response to him sharing what made him uncomfortable, the student that used the term jumped back in and said, you know, I understand where you're coming from. This is what I'm talking about when I am mentioning it. I'm not talking about you directly, and I don't want to offend you. And at the end of the day, isn't that what you want for students to be able to do, so that they can grow up into adults that are able to do that? So we talked about that, and then we also talked about the civil rights movement. And I talked about, okay, because I asked him at what point, what makes yesterday bad trouble in your opinion? And they mentioned the violence, the fact that 4 lives were lost, people were hurt. And I said, okay, well, in the civil rights movement, people were hurt, people died, people were assassinated, people were trampled upon, but no one really looks at the civil rights movement as bad trouble. And John Lewis was involved in the civil rights movement, and he's referring to that as good trouble. What's the difference? Like, what's different about that and yesterday to you? And they did a good job of articulating why they felt the civil rights movement was good trouble, but yesterday was not. And they said the civil rights was fighting for human rights, general rights for all people, whereas they felt yesterday was focused on a specific group of people that were really just looking out for what they felt were their best interests. All of that is from the students. That's just me asking questions. And so once again, I am very proud of them. They were very respectful of each other. No one said anything outlandish or rude. And the hardest part for me in this is just kind of remembering what kids are saying, and then remembering questions I want to ask to kind of follow up. And it is hard for me to make sure I'm not only nodding my head to some of the things some students say, or like affirming some of the things students say and not others, because that could be read as like, oh, we can see, you know, what Miss Robinson wants us to think. So that is a challenge for me, because that's just like a natural thing for me to do when I'm hearing something that like resonates with me, to kind of nod or make some sort of noise of agreement. So I'm on my prep break right now, so I need to check email and stuff like that. But I'll definitely take some footage of how things go at my switch class. I anticipate this class is going to be a little bit more vocal, because they usually are, especially when we talk about things like this. And I'll let you know how that goes as well. But so far, so good. I'm proud of my students. I couldn't ask for anything more.
He challenges the conscience of the Congress.
Bring common sense, gun control legislation to the House floor.
40 years later, John Lewis continues to inspire us.
Are you with me? Let me hear you. 3 civil rights workers that were murdered for trying to help people get registered to vote are looking down on us.
I just want to volunteer. Before we move on, I would like everyone to adjust their camera so I'm at least seeing your forehead. I don't want to see your LED lights. I don't want to see your ceiling fans. Who can tell me what, based on what you just saw, what did John Lewis mean by good trouble? What is good trouble? What was he referring to? Go ahead. Good trouble is what?
I'm pretty sure he meant that by saying getting in trouble for like doing something good, like as a benefit, like going to a protest and like speaking about something good, but also taking the risk of getting in trouble.
Perfect. So he's talking about getting into trouble if what you were doing is going to produce something that is good. So as I said, he was very involved in the civil rights movement and with any activist. So the activists that some of you have chosen, and as you've researched your person, some of your activists may have been arrested, may have had legal issues, may have had some sort of negative consequences in the process of them going out and getting communities involved and behind their cause or their issue. So he's saying, trouble can be good if it's producing something that is going to benefit society. So like I said in a homeroom, I know when I was little and someone told me I was going to get in trouble, I was panicked because trouble was not something that I wanted to get into. It meant I had done something wrong. And so that's why he's deciphering this, or saying that good trouble is, yes, something negative might happen. Yes, you might be arrested. Yes, you might experience violence. But if it's in the name of doing something that you feel is for the greater good, then it is good trouble. Does everybody understand that? Okay, so let's talk about how we're going to have this discussion and how you'll be able to participate in a discussion with your classmates. So the hardest part is just getting started. So I want you guys to think about the question, because this is where we're starting. So because some of you may have a lot of thoughts that you want to share, but the core start of the conversation is just asking yourself, is what happened yesterday an example of good trouble? Yes or no? And then why or why not? And if you know that you plan to respond to that, you're going to use the raise hand feature so that I know that you're sitting in one of the chairs.
They were doing was unnecessary, because I feel like you don't have to go into a Capitol building for there to be change. You don't have to go into the Capitol building and disrupt what is happening on the inside. They already know what's happening if you're doing it on the outside, and I feel like you shouldn't have to go into the building. You're disrupting the whole process of the election, of the electoral process. And also, I feel like people that are protesting for other reasons, considering like Black Lives Matter protests and things like that, we were being shot with rubber bullets. We were being maced about 5 seconds into the protest. We weren't even trying to get into Capitol buildings or do things of that sort of nature. We were being very peaceful. And yet we were being maced and we were being shot with rubber bullets. But these people were not. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's good trouble in the fact that we were trying to do something, but these people aren't really fighting for anything that is going to cause any sort of good trouble. Going to cause something negative upon our entire economy and our entire nation.
Thank you.
So I absolutely think that it was not good trouble at all. I think that the things that were done yesterday were, and I know a lot of people will not agree with this, and I know people will, but it was an act of terrorism yesterday, and it was very much unnecessary, whereas innocent peaceful protesters from the Black Lives Matter movement were held at gunpoint from police, were stabbed, mazed, and when people were coming out of the building yesterday, they were holding hands with the police escorted out. And I think that is absolute, I was going to say something else, that was absolutely not okay. I find it so hilarious. Unhumorously, of course. Mm-hmm. Like, it makes me just so mad that this is what it's come to. Like, if you don't know by now, white people have privilege. Mm-hmm. Oh, it doesn't mean that you have to be poor or rich to have it, but if you are white, you have privilege in this world. And it is obviously evident that it's working outside in the society, especially yesterday. Sorry.
No. We acknowledge and accept all opinions. Okay, thank you.
I do not think what happened yesterday was good trouble. Like I think it was like the complete opposite. Like what they did was completely like immature. Mm-hmm. And I live with people that have different political beliefs as me, so I literally already had an argument yesterday. Like, and hearing their opinions made me so sad and so disappointed with the people who are supposed to be role models in my life. What they did was an exact example of the privilege that they hold. Like, there are innocent, peaceful protesters fighting so that people of color and Black people weren't dying from the people that were supposed to be protecting them. They're getting maced, killed, held at gunpoint, and the people that were doing it to them were not facing any like trouble at all. Like they were not caused to trouble. They broke into a Capitol building, and they were escorted out and like carefully taken out. They took selfies with them. They were letting them in, and nothing was happening. But when peaceful protesters are walking on the street, they're getting maced and harmed.
Thank you.
I feel like what happened yesterday was like not good trouble. Because I feel like if you wanted to like how the peaceful protesters did it, if you want to like prove a point.
Okay, it is 3:52. I am done teaching for the day. After my switch class, I had to jump right into my leadership meeting. I actually had to just stop the conversation in my switch class because at the end of the class session, that class ends at 2:20, but we were really like in the thick of this conversation, and there were definitely students that wanted to keep talking and sharing their thoughts, feelings, and perspectives. But I told them, I was like, I have to leave at 2:30 because I had this leadership meeting that was starting. So as soon as that ended, I jumped over to the leadership meeting. I definitely had other things that I needed to talk to my leadership kids about, but in the spirit of just giving students the opportunity to process, I started the meeting by saying, is there anyone that kind of wants to share their thoughts, feelings, reactions, emotions about yesterday? And a couple students shared. It was very informal. And then we went about our business, and then I had to go drop something off at the school, and now here I am getting ready to eat lunch at 3:30. But yes, I got footage from both classes. The second class went just as well as my first class, so my switch class is my second class. This class, it's just so interesting to see how the two classes interact with lessons differently, but especially this one. So while the first class had probably the same handful of students participating, the same could be said for the second class, but there were more people coming in and out, like popping in to say one comment, contributing to the conversation. So the amount of students that participated in my switch class was higher, which I'm not surprised by because, like I said, as a group, they tend to be more vocal, especially in relationship to, politics, social justice. Like I have one girl in class that her goal is to be a future president, and she chimed in, and she very rarely speaks, and spoke with like a lot of conviction. And the other interesting thing that was different about my switch class is they immediately took yesterday's events and ran parallels to the Black Lives Matter movement, specifically in relationship to the response of law enforcement and their thoughts about that and how they felt about that. And for the most part, the people that shared felt like there was a discrepancy between the two and were very upset by that. And where that came up briefly in my homeroom class, there was really only one student that brought that out, and it was a conversation that like passed, unless I brought something else back up in relationship to that. But it was clear that that was very upsetting to students in my switch class, and we really just kind of focused on that. I didn't even need to ask any additional questions because they were just so involved in that that it just kind of kept going. And in the second class, I don't know if I got any footage of one of those students speaking. Like there was a moment where I got so like I was choked up, like I thought, oh my God, am I gonna cry in class? Because she was emotional about just feeling like she was let down by adults. And so they talked about that a few times in my switch class, how they felt so upset and angry by the adults in general, and that the adults are letting them down with how they're handling things. So I would say today's lesson was a success. What I wanted to get out of it, I did. They understand the concept of protest and what good can come of it if done correctly and properly. They understand the concept of good trouble, and they were able to on their own decipher whether or not yesterday was good or bad trouble. All the students that shared, they seemed unanimous in the idea that it was bad trouble or was not good trouble, despite the fact that they don't all have the same political beliefs, because there were definitely students who spoke up and shared and made it clear that their family were Trump supporters, and now they're left like lumped. One of the students said, now I'm lumped into a group of people that I don't associate with, or I don't believe in. So, but still he was able to agree that no, that was bad trouble. And this was all done without me ever sharing what I think. And so that's the point that I was trying to make earlier. These conversations will be successful. You can feel secure and safe in what you're doing as a teacher, as long as you remember your place in it. Your place is just to provide the information in truth, like the true, accurate information, and let them wade through it. And 9 times out of 10, what you thought your job was in terms of getting them to come to some conclusion about something, they will do on their own. And that's what you really want. Like, that's really the purpose of teaching. And some of them will and some of them won't. And those that won't, that is their prerogative, you know. So I think no matter what age group you teach, if you just focus on that, you will be okay. Your job is not to tell them what to think. It's just to allow them to think. So, yeah, good day. I'm glad I did it. I have no regrets. And then after the leadership class ended, I had a student stick behind who is not my student in terms of the fact that she's not in my homeroom class or switch class. I only have her in that leadership class. And she just wanted to talk to me on a one-on-one basis about yesterday, and express the idea that she felt like there's some teachers that she has where she's not, she can't, you know, let her thoughts be known. That's Jenny snorting. That she doesn't feel like she's allowed to let her thoughts be known and express her thoughts and opinions, because she doesn't think the teacher will look too kindly upon that. And she was a student of color, and you know, she was referencing some of her teachers that are white, and I think that's very telling. And I think especially if you are a white educator, that you gotta make sure that students feel like it's a safe place for them to say how they feel without being judged, or without their feelings being minimized, or without you saying, no, I think you're reading too much into that, because that's a true feeling. And that was one of the points I was trying to make in my Dear White Teachers video. Like, there's something about what her teachers are doing that makes her feel she's not allowed to express these thoughts without some sort of repercussion, because she kept saying I'm not allowed to do that. But I can talk about this on and on and on, but it was a good day. I'm going to now eat some lunch. As far as the rest of the day is concerned, I am going to grade. I have grading that I was supposed to be doing yesterday, but I couldn't for obvious reasons. And then I get to have Chick-fil-A for dinner because it's a fundraiser night at the local Chick-fil-A. So I have to eat Chick-fil-A to support the band community at my school. So the other thing I wanted to mention that has nothing to do, or 2 things I wanted to mention that has nothing to do with today's lesson, is I took a Peloton class this morning, and I can't even tell you how many high fives I was getting from the people in the class. And I don't know what that was about and why that was. I didn't hit a milestone of any sort. And so I almost feel like it was just, they were just people around the country and even maybe the world supporting me as a person of color and how I might be feeling about yesterday's events, because it was insane. And that made me feel good. Like, maybe that's what it was, but maybe it wasn't, but that's what I think it was. So I just thought that that was really interesting, because obviously I have a profile picture, and if you can't tell in my profile picture that I'm black, the hashtag that I write under is Black Girl Magic, so it's clear. But I thought that was really nice. It was a nice way to start a day that I, you know, had a little bit of anxiety about. So if you enjoyed this vlog, give it a thumbs up. If you enjoyed seeing how I chose to handle this in the classroom, give me a thumbs up. If you want to do this more in your classroom and you're a classroom teacher, give me a thumbs up. If you are a parent that appreciates teachers making these kinds of efforts in the classroom, give this video a thumbs up. And again, as always, you're free to leave comments, as long as they are positive and productive. But I want you guys to stay well, and I will be sure to see you guys tomorrow. So I will see you then.